Well, this is a surprise. Usually people try to avoid the abyss. I'm curious, what could convince someone like you to risk so much, crossing the lands of the abyssal dwarves and the dark kin, to reach this rent in reality? History. I will admit that's a new one. Usually people come here for power, arcane knowledge, vast riches, the usual. You know, you intrigue me, scholar. Usually I put on an intimidating presence and try to trick you into making a rather poor deal, but today I am feeling generous. Today, scholar, I gift you with a general overview of the history of Mantica, from the time of light to now. And if you stay quiet during the telling, I may decide not to eat you. No promises, though. Once, a long, long time ago, the world was much more pleasant. It was almost like a fairy tale. I mean, there were dangerous beasts and clashes between nations, but there were nothing like the dark magic-produced abominations and devastating conflicts that are commonplace today. It was more a time of noble knights, trickster thieves, and wise wizards that you would find in any storybook. In this time of light, there were three important civilizations: the Kingdom of the Elves, the Underlands of the Dwarves, and the Grand Republic of Primovantor. At the time, the largest realm of men. There were smaller realms of men, but honestly they were fairly unimportant, at least for this story. All three of these noble races worshipped beings known as the Celestians, the children of the stars. No one really knew where these beings came from, whether they came from a dimension beyond mortal understanding, or were simply always in ours, waiting for the foolish primitives to finally advance far enough to be ready for enlightenment. What is known is that they had vast, otherworldly powers. Powers that they used to raise the mortals beneath them into unimaginable heights. Under the guidance of these Celestians, the three factions worked together in peace and harmony. Great cities became places of wonder. Emerald forests stretched for leagues around, and the creatures of the forest lived in harmony with the mortal races. Men walked upon the soil of other planes of existence. The elves created works of art that have not yet been surpassed to this day, and the dwarves delved their greatest underground cities. And all of this work, all of these grand achievements, were destroyed due to the actions of one love-lorn elf. The elf, Kalasur was the greatest mage of his age, and possibly any future age. It was said he could call clouds from the sky, hop between dimensions, and even travel to other worlds, as well as do a bunch of other impossible things that are probably at least half true. One thing he definitely did do was be the first to learn the magical speech of the dragons, forging a bond between elf and dragon that has continued on, annoyingly, to this day. Beyond his powerful magical abilities, he was also a master of more mundane skills, an artist whose pieces could transport your mind to new heights of imagination, a statesman who could bring peace to even the bitterest of enemies, and a warrior skilled in various arts of war. He was, in many ways, a hero beyond compare. And perhaps that's where it should have ended. Kalasur traveling the world being so bloody perfect and dying of old age. Well, old age by elven standards anyway. In his deathbed surrounded by his adoring public with songs of praise in the air. However, that became impossible once he met the daughter of Marcone of Primovantor. Marcone was a well-loved elder statesman of no small reputation, who had won many honors in his long life. Because of this, he was granted the title of envoy to the elven city of Thorenia Adar, the home of the elven king's high court. With him, he brought his daughter, Elina Thora, a beautiful maiden with a good head on her shoulders. Most had no doubt in their minds that she had the potential to be just as accomplished as her father, if not more so. Too bad fate decided otherwise. Once Kalasur set his eyes upon Elanathora, his heart was taken, and he immediately began courting her, hoping to make the intelligent and lovely woman his wife. Now during this time, the union between elf and human was not unknown. There were many tales about the doomed romance between them. An elf finds themselves smitten with a lovely young human lass or a strapping young human lad, and chooses to live together with them in wedded bliss, only for the poor human to eventually die of old age, and leave the elf to grieve in a dramatic fashion for a few years, until the elf eventually forgets about his or her former one true love, and finds another human to play with. Now like those human lads and ladies, Elanathora had something they lacked. I believe it's called, self-respect. She had read those same stories, and had no plans to live and die under the shadow of an elf, especially an elf as powerful and famous as Kalasur. Such a thought filled her with dread, for she felt it would run over any plans and ambitions she had for her own life. As politely as possible, which was very polite since she was the daughter of an envoy, she refused Kalasur's advances, making it very clear that although she valued him as a friend, she had no romantic interest in him whatsoever. Although Kalasur was rather persistent, for what some would say was an uncomfortably long time, he eventually gave up, his spirit crushed. For an elf used to having even reality itself bow to his whim, the denial of this woman he was convinced was his soulmate was quite the blow. Kalasur defeated, he traveled to the groves of Adar, around the city of Tharina Adar. The groves of Adar, although currently buried under an ocean, was once a beautiful enchanted forest bursting with latent magical power. So much so that it wasn't just visited by lovelorn elves, but also Celestians who wished to visit it when evening fell. It was here that Kalasur met the young Celestian known as Askan. Now Kalasur had spoken often to the Celestians in his youth, allowing him to glean much from their arcane knowledge. And so, Kalasur easily began a conversation with Askan, speaking of various subjects both mundane and mystical. Although Kalasur tried to keep a happy front, Askan could sense the sadness within Kalasur's heart. After gentle prodding, Kalasur told his tale of unrequited love. Askan, in obvious sympathy, gave Kalasur a solution to his dilemma: the plans for a magical mirror. The mirror would allow Elanathora to see into the future, to see the happy life she and Kalasur would have together. Once she saw it, Askan predicted, she couldn't help but fall in love with Kalasur. But Askan did give Kalasur a warning, telling him there will be a moment when a golden bird will sing. Once that happens, Kalasur must make sure to not let Elanathora continue staring into the mirror, for tragedy will strike if that occurs. Kalasur thanked Askan and almost sprinted from the groves, thoughts of using this strange device to gain the heart of his true love filling him with renewed purpose. For as we all know from fairy tales, using magic to obtain another's love couldn't possibly go wrong. The creation of the mirror required many rare and esoteric items that would be impossible for most mortals. But Kalasur was, as I previously stated, the greatest mage of all time. He found even the rarest ingredients with relative ease. The most important of these ingredients, however, was a glimmer of the Star of Creation, the star which gave the Celestians their power. Why the Celestians didn't have some sort of guardian, or at least a do not touch sign, I honestly couldn't tell you. As I said before, it was a different time. Tools and building material in hand, Kalasur began to craft the mirror. Now, it is said that the sky split with a terrible thunder when he silvered the glass, and the sea flooded inland several leagues when he set the glass in its frame, as if the world was trying to warn him this was a terrible idea. But Kalasur was an elf in love, and he wouldn't let a little thing like the potential consequences of his actions get in his way. Finished with the mirror, Kalasur set upon an even greater challenge, convincing Elanathora to look into it. Think of it from her perspective. She had spent perhaps weeks, if not months, finally convincing this elf to stop courting her, only for the elf to return a few months later, telling her to look into a mirror. She was having none of it. Kalasur tried using his wits, his charms, and various gifts, and when all that failed, He just pestered her like a child asking his parent to purchase an expensive toy. Eventually, more out of frustration than anything else, Elena Thor finally stared into the mirror. When she finally did, oh, what wonders she saw. She saw a life of love and adventure, with a husband devoted to her more than any other husband could possibly be. She saw fine children who shared the best aspects of human and elven kind. She saw her life extended by her proximity to her loving husband. And finally, when old age finally took her, she saw herself on her deathbed surrounded by her loved ones, her name and accomplishments sung by elves, dwarves, and humans for centuries to come. Elena Thor looked from the mirror and gazed upon Kalasur in a new light, seeing, perhaps for the first time, a future with this mighty elf. Kalasur was lost in her eyes, so much so that at first, he didn't hear the song of a golden bird on the wind. Finally noticing the song, Kalasur panicked, trying to convince Elena Thor to step away from the mirror. Curious of what could worry her possible future husband so, she once again looked upon the mirror and saw the future that occurred beyond her death. She saw herself rotting in her grave as her husband cried out in anguish. As obsessed as he was with her in life, he was just as obsessed with her in death, romancing woman after woman to try to fill the hole left by her death, and living in a deep depression. He saw her children, without their mother's guidance and estranged from their now distant father, fight with their dual human and elven nature, eventually causing one of them to grow bitter, and raise an army to fight against his own father, killing him. She saw Kalasur die at his child's hand, racked with shame at what his actions had wrought upon the world. Elena Thor saw all this and screamed out that this could not be. Kalasur tried to calm her to no avail. Elena Thor had not only seen these visions of the future, but they were so vivid she almost felt it, and the terror, pain, and violence that she witnessed pushed her to end this madness as quickly as possible. In one swift motion, she ended the vision the only way she could think of, by shattering the mirror. When the mirror shattered, it did not simply break a perfectly good piece of furniture. The glimmer, the beam of light used in its construction, was still tied to the star of creation. And when the mirror shattered, so did the star. And with the star, the Celestians. The Celestians that weren't destroyed utterly by the shattering were split in twain. The once powerful gods turning to two lesser half-gods, a shining aspect and a wicked aspect. The shining gods, what some could loosely define as the good gods, had a strict and cold morality with no real room for subtlety. Stealing a loaf of bread was just as bad as treason in many of their minds. The wicked gods, the evil ones as some would call them, revel in destruction, and use their powers for all manner of cruelty and perversity. As you can guess, these two polar opposites eventually went to war, and they dragged the mortal races with them. The god war raged for centuries, and no part of Mantica was left untouched. No race was free of the corrupting influence of the wicked gods. Abyssal dwarfs split from the dwarven brethren, darkkin split from the elven brethren, as well as humans and other races who felt the darkness's call. Along with the corrupting whispers of the wicked gods, many new races were fashioned from dark magic for the war. Orcs, ogres, goblins, and other created races marched against the cities of men, dwarf, and elf. These centuries of conflict eventually ended in a final battle. On one side was Demivar, the Unyielding, a demigod born of the union of the god of justice Mescator, and the human woman Laria, High Council of Primorvantor. On the other side was Oskan, god of lies, his body monstrous and bursting with power from all the evil he caused from his one simple gift. Now there were many theories about Oskan's true intentions when he gifted Kalasur the plans for what would later be called the Venulian Mirror. Some said he was simply a bored Celestian youth, tired of his apparent immortality, and wanting to taste true danger like mortals, not foreseeing the tragedy he would bring. Others, however, state that Oskan was more unbalanced than most Celestians, his dark side dominant but still constrained by his light. Unable to shatter the star himself, for whatever reason, he manipulated poor Kalasur to do it for him. I'm inclined to believe this theory, for when Oskan split in twain, his dark side captured and killed his light side with extreme ease. In a battle that shook the world, Dumovar glowed with power and flew into the air with godly wings. Defeating Oskan, Dumovar took Oskan's black axe, forged from the blackness between stars, and slashed a rent in reality. This rent in reality, as you can guess, being the Abyss. With his power, he forced almost all of the wicked gods through it. After he was done, Dumovar crashed to the ground, his godly power and his life spent. After that, the mortal races tried to get things back to normal, although that proved extremely difficult. The elves became more aloof and guarded, no longer willing to share their wisdom with their former allies. The dwarves refused to ever trust the elves again, saying elven pride and sentiment caused the God War, which is admittedly fair. And the humans of the Primo Vantor Empire tried to rebuild their kingdom, but found their people a bit more barbaric than they used to be, as if a darkness had settled in their souls. Not to mention other threats that did not exist during the time of light. For example, the more violent races created in the God War, such as orcs, still attacked cities on occasion, and the influence of the wicked gods was still being felt, despite their physical forms being stuck in the Abyss. Over about 1,000 years, as all of these civilizations tried to rebuild themselves, almost no one noticed, as the seas slowly receded, and glaciers encroached on the lands of mortals, ruining land and destroying cities with a, well, glacial speed. The elves, most likely due to their long lives, began to notice these changes and aimed to discover a source. Eventually, elven seers did. A wicked goddess, simply known as Winter, was at the heart of this change. Missed somehow by Dumovar when he cast the wicked gods into the Abyss, she was slowly strangling the life of the world, hoping to crush the opposition without them even realizing it. When she knew she was discovered, she accelerated her plans. Glaciers advanced with unnatural speed, and armies of strange creatures marched in front of them. Men, dwarf, and elf marched side by side once again, and it was a grueling 150-year war. For although they only faced one god, the three races were much weaker than they were 1,000 years before. Eventually, it all culminated in a final battle between the forces of Winter and the greatest mage of his age, Valandor the Great. Not sure why you would title yourself the Great, seems a little pretentious to me and not very descriptive, but who am I to judge? After a brutal battle, Valandor and his forces defeated Winter. The world was saved again from the actions of the wicked gods. However, the forces of light could not foresee the consequences of their victory. Without her magic to sustain the glaciers, they melted with unnatural speed, causing the seas to rise up quickly and threatened to wash over all the lands of Mantica. Valandor was able to use his magic to hold back the waves to some extent, and although he saved many lives, the effort ended his own. At that point, the Grand Republic of Primo Vantor was shattered. Already weakened from infighting within and attacks from without, the turbulent seas that destroyed and subsumed vast portions of the nation's territory was the final nail on its coffin. And that all leads to the current state of affairs. The world you know now. A world in conflict. Various factions fighting for domination across the world of Mantica. Humans, elves, dwarves, undead, as well as many other races all trying to make their mark upon the world. Most of them believing that this is the way it has always been. It's both tragic and, I'll admit, a little hilarious. Well, Scholar, my tale is done. I hope you took plenty of notes. Now, as I promised, I won't eat you. But my pet is feeling a bit peckish. I'll give you a count of 10 before I set her loose. If you're lucky and fit, you might survive. Good luck.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video about the lore of Kings of War. If you like it, please like, subscribe, and comment. And even press that little bell next to the subscribe button so you know whenever I post a video. If you really like it, please consider giving to my Patreon. With the extra money gives the time I need to work on these stories I love. Anyway, thanks for listening and see you next time.